and welcome to this third lesson of GCSE Elizabeth I remote learning lesson. This one is going to focus on the problem of religion. You are going to need your lesson template notebook again. You are going to need to turn to lesson 3, which is on the problems of religion, and the page you're looking for looks a lot like this. So it's on page 11 where you should be in your lesson notes booklet, and you can see the first task is a smart task. I want you to write down all the problems that you can remember that Elizabeth had in the early part of her reign. Think about the work we've done in the last 2 lessons. Think about the different problems that you made notes on. Think about the different problems that have been discussed in those previous 2 lessons, and then without looking back, try and write down what you can remember. So pause this now and write down all the problems you can remember that she had. Okay, so you should have had some problems written down, like, for example, problems to do with her gender, problems to do with legitimacy, problems to do with money, finance, problems to do with foreign relations with other countries, problems that she inherited as a result of her background, problems that she inherited because she wasn't married and she wasn't going to get married, and the difficulty that was going to cause in terms of her having an heir, etc., etc. So you can check back in your notes to make sure that you've got all the problems written down that we had from last lesson. You can tick off the ones that you got right. So what we're now going to do is move on to look at the main problem for this lesson, which is the problem of religion. And you could argue, and some would argue, this is the biggest problem that Elizabeth had in her reign. You're going to start by looking at this video clip, so you'll need to find the link at the bottom of page 11 in your revision, in your lesson notes booklet, and you need to open the link in a different window, and I want you to watch the clip. And when we come back in a moment, we will talk about what you learned from that clip. Okay, so the question underneath that clip in your lesson notes template asks, why did Henry VIII change the English Church? Well, I think we can see quite clearly in the clip that you've just watched that Henry did it because he wanted to get a divorce from Catherine of Aragon, and he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn, who was the mother of Elizabeth, and the reason he did that is that he wanted to get a male heir to the throne. This wasn't because he had some deep religious reason for changing the country. He wasn't committed to a Reformation and Protestantism in the way that many people in Europe were at this time for religious and philosophical reasons. He just wanted to get a divorce so he could marry Anne Boleyn because he'd fallen in love with her, and Catherine of Aragon wasn't going to give him any more children. So this decision of Henry then has some severe consequences, because obviously he changes the church, he moves the country in the direction of Protestantism, even though the majority of the people in the country are actually Catholic, and that poses a big problem. Right, what you're now going to do is look at some information on pages 12 and 13 of your lesson notes booklet that really start to dig a little deeper into this change in religion, this Reformation, which changed the church in England from a Roman Catholic church to a Protestant church. You can see on the slide here, you've got this information on page 12 in your booklet, how big a difference it was between Roman Catholicism and Protestantism. And this is really a fundamental difference in people's lives. People now in the secular 21st century are not particularly religious in this country. They don't necessarily attend church very much. Religion is not particularly important to them. However, in the lives of English people in the 16th century, religion was incredibly important. So this change from a Catholic church to a Protestant church, and then during the time of Mary I, to change back to a Catholic church briefly from 1553 to 1558 before Elizabeth then became queen, and people anticipated that she would change the church back to being Protestant again. This is a huge big deal in people's lives, this massive religious change, the people who Elizabeth is then going to become queen of. And think about how those religious divisions that existed in England in 1558 were going to cause problems for Elizabeth. She was a Protestant. For the vast majority of people in the country, they were Catholic. The vast majority of the bishops in the church were Catholic. So if she wanted to ask them to do something that wasn't Catholic, it was in fact Protestant, that was going to cause a problem. How was she going to run the church if she didn't have enough bishops to be able to actually organize and control the church? So this issue of religion is hugely important in terms of how she is going to be able to run the country, how she's going to get support from people, how people maybe are not going to support her for religious reasons. So what you need to do is read the information on pages 12 and 13, and then you need to answer the question underneath about how these religious problems really caused difficulties for Elizabeth in the early part of her reign when she became queen in 1558. Okay, well done for that. You should now have a sense of how this this roller coaster of religious change in Tudor times, moving from Protestant to Catholic and then back to Protestant again, how this posed a real problem for Elizabeth. It also posed a problem in a different way. If you look at this map, which you find also on page 14 of your lesson notes booklet, you can see there's actually quite an important geographical division in terms of people's religious belief. So if you're around London in the southeast, obviously close to the court, close to where Parliament is, close to where the seat of power is, then there's people who are really quite Protestant. But if you look at the north and the northwest, much further away, much harder for Elizabeth to control, these areas are in some cases very strongly Catholic. So there's a power base in these areas of people who are Catholic, and this is obviously going to pose a problem for Elizabeth in the future, because these people who are Catholic and are powerful are quite a long way away from London and the southeast, and quite difficult for Elizabeth to control. Okay, the very last part of this lesson, I want you to think about how the religious problems that Elizabeth had linked to some of the other problems that she also had at the start of her reign. So if you think about the starter activity that you did, where you wrote down the different problems that you'd learned in the previous two lessons, now you've learned about some of these religious problems that she had. What I want you to do is to think about how these religious problems could be linked to some of the other problems that she had. So how does religion link to the issue of marriage or legitimacy? How does it link to the issue of foreign affairs? How is it linked to the issue of money? For some of these problems, religion is really quite clearly interlinked with them. So I want you to pause in a moment, and I want you to jot down the ways in which religion might link to other key problems that Elizabeth had. Good. Okay. Now for me, I would say that probably one of the major ways that religion poses a big problem for Elizabeth in terms of how it links to other issues is that obviously it links to foreign affairs. You have France, you have Spain, you have other powerful countries in Europe that are strongly Catholic, and you have Britain or England in this case as a small little country that is Protestant, and so it is out on a limb against the other more powerful countries in Europe. There's also an element to obviously in which religion links to legitimacy. You know, the fact that Henry divorces Catherine of Aragon in order to marry Anne Boleyn. That is the thing which triggers the English Reformation. But that decision, and then him having a child with Anne Boleyn, and the child being Elizabeth, and the issue of whether or not Elizabeth is in fact legitimate, all of that is tied up with religion as well. So, that is the end of this lesson on religious problems. When we come back in the fourth lesson, we will try and tie all these problems together that we've looked at in the first three lessons to do with Elizabeth's early reign, the problems that she had when she first became queen in 1558, and we'll have a look at how we might answer an exam question in relation to those problems. So well done for your work today. I hope you've learned something useful, and until next time, goodbye.